Denis Campbell is with us today. He is editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine. He also hosts Worldview with Denis Campbell on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/worldview show. Denis, last week we talked about the horrible murder of drummer Lee Rigby. And in the time that's elapsed since then, there have been, number one, a number of subsequent arrests, but number two, there's kind of a broader discussion about this kind of homegrown domestic terrorism discussion. So let's start first just with the arrests and kind of the facts of what's taken place.
Well, as you said, there have been a number of arrests, but not much detail has been released about them. One of the interviews we did for Worldview Show was with Adrian Masters. He's the political director of ITV, and he sort of explained to us what happens when the Cobra Committee is formed by Prime Minister Cameron, and that pretty much shuts down the release of all information. It comes out pretty much now in dribs and drabs. And so you have a lot of people scurrying for information, but there's just not an awful lot of information coming out. We've had a number of arrests here, but no details as to what those arrests entail. We just know that they were persons of interest. We obviously had the properties that belonged to the two suspects looked at. We've had Drummer Rigby's wife visit the scene finally of the murder itself, but not much news coming out that is of any substance. And the way the press handles it, there's really not a lot of speculation either at this point.
So let's get into kind of the implications here. You know, here in the U.S., we had a period where, for example, New York Republican Congressman Peter King was just absolutely obsessed with holding hearing after hearing on the American Muslim problem. And for example, I think I don't remember if it was 2011 or 2012, there were barely any incidents of terror involving American Muslims, but many incidents of terror involving basically, white domestic terrorism, as we've pointed out on this show many times. I'm curious, what has the reaction been in the UK to this incident, and kind of what have the repercussions been in terms of profiling or focusing on specific groups?
Well, we have had a number of incidents involving the white supremacist group, the EDL. They're the ones, and by the way, that Facebook page that we were referring people to last week turned out to be an EDL front page. They try to find the legitimacy in what they do, but really they've been attacking mosques. They've thrown smoke bombs. They've attacked people of clearly Muslim origin. And it's really been very ugly, but even that's beginning to taper off slightly as we get towards the end of the week.
So then give us a sense of the perception of Muslims as terrorists in the UK versus that perception in the United States. Is it stronger in the United Kingdom? Are there factual differences in the portion of these types of incidents that Muslims actually are involved in there versus in the US?
Well, we have our own issues, obviously, but the Muslim community is much larger here in the UK. I mean, people have often referred to London as Londanistan because of the very large Pakistani population, the very large Asian, Middle Eastern, Persian populations of all ethnic varieties. What happens is that, yes, the groups tend to cluster together, but what we're seeing is much less of the isolation. And you mentioned Peter King, and 2 years ago, it was 2011 because they'd just come into power in January of that year. They decided they were going to hold basically a witch hunt. And I'm sure your audience will remember Minnesota's Keith Ellison, the only Muslim member of the United States Congress, very bravely and very emotionally standing before that committee, and saying, look, we're the same as you. And, quite frankly, to look at Muslim extremists, you'd have to put them in the same category as the KKK because it's such a small percentage of the population. What I worry about is the homegrown terrorist. What I worry about are the people that look like you and me, David, and others that are being radicalized on the internet, the disenfranchised, the youths that spend a lot of time, playing video games or are just completely removed from society. That's the threat that everybody's afraid of, I think, even in the United States as well as here. We have a lot of youth unemployment in this country. And, as you look at what goes on across Europe, the hardest hit groups economically with austerity are those in the youth category. So it becomes very easy to catch these people feeling very much down on themselves, very low self-esteem, for a very charismatic leader or somebody on the internet playing that role to then indoctrinate them and grow them, much like you saw with the Sarnaeus.
Right. I mean, it seems like in the same way that when we talk about the mass shootings in the U.S. and there's discussion over, well, what really deep down does cause people to think of doing a mass shooting as a kind of outlet for whatever it is that they're feeling. And you're kind of getting at a lot of those things, right? The lack of satisfaction with life in whatever form that kind of manifests itself in individuals. So is there, give us a sense of, here in the U.S., there's a wide difference. You talk to some people and they kind of intellectually understand what causes terror and what causes mass shootings. And then there's others who you ask about it and they just make all sorts of racist and xenophobic comments. Do you have a share of both in the UK? What's the split? What's the sentiment?
You do have them. You just don't hear that much from them because they don't get that much media attention. We do have a couple of outlets, but nothing like what you see on Fox and some of the other places where it almost in some aspects seems to be stoked. It means, that if there's a way to find, a disenfranchised group of people that can then be taken advantage of, yes, they'll do whatever they can to move forward on that front.
Do you have critical media attention though of those groups? Like, for example,
yes.
Okay,
yes.
so there is that, yeah.
There's a lot of discussion going on about, the role of various elements and how to integrate them into society. I think I have to go back, though, to what I said earlier, which is that it's largely an economic issue right now. I mean, if I look in Wales, for example, where I'm based, you have third and fourth generation families that used to be in coal mining that have been on benefits for so long. I mean, this becomes a very demoralizing and dehumanizing situation if you can't find a job, if you can't find your way onto the ladder at all. I mean, there was an article just yesterday I read about, almost 50% of the U.S. now is in poverty, technically on the poverty scale. And if you look at countries like what we've seen in Greece, where 51% of the people under the age of 21 are without a job, you're seeing this going across the entire European Union. Economic crisis, economic austerity has been devastating to those trying to get on the ladder. Property values may be going up and the stock market may be at record levels, but underlying all that is all of this. And I think this is what leads to some of the domestic terrorism issues that we're talking about here.
All right, we've been speaking with Denis Campbell, editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine. Check out his YouTube channel, youtube.com/worldviewshow, and also BookView TV, youtube.com/BookView TV, the new channel. We'll talk more about that next week, Denis. Thanks, as always, for being here.
My pleasure.